Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I'm so excited to be on here tonight with one of my favorite authors and favorite people. This is, I believe, our third talk since COVID started, but it's always fun to talk with Ace, and we were just catching up and looking forward to hopefully in November when maybe he can be back in store. For those of you watching, if you have any questions, make sure to put those in the live chat. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching on Facebook, you can just put them in the comments. I will see all of them and we'll get to them in a little bit. There's no such thing as a dumb question. So Ace and I are going to talk for a little while and then we'll get to those. We have a busy week again with virtual events. I'll be back on here tomorrow at 1 with Louise Candlish and Lisa Jewell. Back on here tomorrow night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, all the nights this week. So for more information about our virtual events, you can find the calendar at murderbooks.com. Plus, they are all listed on Facebook where they will be streamed live. We are starting to return to in-store events soon. I think we have a few scheduled for September, and fingers crossed we can continue along that way. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get to my friend and one of my favorite authors, Ace Atkins.
Hey, McKenna, how's it going? How are you?
Good to see you. I'm going to do your official what's it called? Bio real quick. Yeah. First off, cheers.
Cheers.
Good to see you. Wish you were here in person.
Absolutely. It's not the same. We don't really, this is the first time, the last few times we've done this is so strange. It doesn't really seem like a book is out unless you're at Murder by the Book. So I hope we can resume in person very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus the margaritas afterwards.
Definitely.
All right, so I imagine most of the people watching already know who you are, but let me go ahead and do your bio here. Ace Atkins is the author of 28 books, including 11 Quinn Colson novels, the first two of which, The Ranger and The Lost Ones, were nominated for the Edgar Award for Best Novel. He has a third Edgar nomination for his short story, Last Fair Deal Gone Down. He's the author of 9 New York Times-bestselling novels in the continuation of Robert B. Parker's Spenser series. Before turning to fiction, he was a correspondent for the St. Petersburg Times and a crime reporter for the Tampa Tribune, and he played defensive end for Auburn University football. So the book we're here to talk about tonight is The Heathens. I also have, for those of you interested in ordering, fortunately, we get to see Ace a lot. So if you want a signed copy, you're welcome to order one with a book plate and then bring it back or send it back into store when he's going to be here in November. But we do have the signed book plates. And then we have a handful of Quinn Colson For Sheriff from the last book. And we have this super cool Freebird sticker, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But first off, in your own words, because there's a lot going on in this book, and if I summarize it, I'll miss something. Tell me where we find Quinn Colson and what is happening in this book.
Well, I can't believe it seems like we just launched a series just the other day. You and I were talking about what the book was going to be about and this new series I was going to start. And I think, McKenna, you and I talked about, we're very good friends, off the book business, but we do share a lot of information. So even in before The Ranger even was out, you and I were talking about it. And now we're 10 years in, and this is the 11th book. And I'm very grateful to, I did have another series that only got 4 books along, and things happen. You change publishers, certain books capture the imagination of readers, that kind of thing. So I'm very glad to be talking to you here about book number 11 for Quinn Colson. But as in these books, things do change. The community that I read about in North Mississippi and Tibahaw County continues to grow. Quinn Colson, like us all, gets older. He's recently got married. He's got 2 kids. He's finally fixed the old family farm. He's an elected official as the sheriff of this rural county in Mississippi. And this starts, it's like I think somewhat the typical comedy structure of things start off very good. We're in a very good spot, and then they get worse.
Hell breaks loose.
They get worse, and then they hopefully get better again. So as we find Quinn in the world in Tibahaw County, things are good. The community is doing well. The old storefronts that were shuttered and kind of closed when he first came home from the Army are now thriving, and he's very happy. And then nothing happens to him, but something happens in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the story revolves around these teenagers who are accused of doing something and on the run. And before I get into more of that, I understand that this book was inspired by a case that you covered, or a real life case in Tampa. You want to talk a little bit about the Valessa Robinson case?
Sure, and I always point out, to be really clear, that this is very loosely inspired.
Yeah.
Sometimes people mistake the fact that when you write a book where something is inspired by, they think it's the actual true story. And as you know, I've done books like that. I've done books that are true life events, true crime books, but this was definitely inspired by this Valessa Robinson case from the late 90s. At the time, I was working. I was writing books, but I was a full-time newspaper reporter. And this story that happened in Tampa involved a 14-year-old girl who was accused of murdering her own mother. And it, of course, became a national story. It was all over the place. We had press in from all over the country to cover this thing. And when the story broke, when the mother's body was found, Valessa and two older teenage boys went on the run, and they were headed west. And they were, they quickly escaped out of Tampa. They were eventually found in Texas, where a deputy sheriff had to shoot off their tires to stop them. And they were on this cross-country adventure trying to get somewhere. I'm not really sure what they had in mind, but they thought they could escape this prosecution. In the story, the true life story that I covered as a reporter, both with the actual crime and then later in the court trial, which I did a little bit of that court trial, she was guilty. Valessa did assist in the murder of her mother. She did have assistance from these two friends, and it became very quickly known that she was responsible for this. In fact, she ended up being not only charged but convicted of the murder. But it always stayed with me. And going 20 years on, I'm always trying to look for really good stories. I never want to write a book for Spenser or for Quinn that is, as my dad would term the literary term he would use, would be half-assing it, where you don't have a good story to tell, where you're just only doing something because you have a good character you want to get around. I thought about this story, and the genesis of it for me was, what if these kids had been innocent? And what if they felt like they had few options because they were kids, nobody was listening to them. They felt they were being railroaded, and they take off on a cross-country trip. And once I had that idea in place, it became a really good story to not only tell about Tillahaw County, but also allow the series to get out of rural Mississippi and visit other places.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting with this one that Quinn isn't the central character necessarily. I mean, he's clearly there, but you really have quite the cast of characters happening. I have a long-winded question here for you. So I loved TJ and I loved Chastity, who, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, she's a aspiring social media influencer and uses that to, drum up this following for what they're doing. But you have a Faulkner epigraph at the beginning of the book that states, quote, "When grown people speak of the innocence of children, they don't really know what they mean. Pressed, they will go a step further and say, well, ignorance then. The child is neither." And also later in the book, Lily says something along the lines of how amazed she is at how capable these children are, how they can do so many things. Was it your intention to kind of point out how teenagers are so grown up these days and how social media plays a role in that?
Well, for me, I was thinking about that particular case that inspired this, and I was thinking about how different things may have played out had there been social media. At the time that these kids were on the run, the only way they could connect back or, state their innocence or try to prove what was going on is if they had talked to somebody in local media, with TV or whatever. But now we have the capability, kids do, or everybody does, to, have a TV station in your hands and communicate this stuff. And so throughout the novel, they're able to get the facts about the case, and TJ Bird is able to make these proclamations and have a really huge following of people listening to her. The other thing that was probably equally inspired by, if not more inspired by, there was a great film in the 80s, back when you were just a little kid, called The Legend of Billie Jean, and it was about a young girl on the run. And I always liked that feeling of that story, and I wondered how it would play out in modern times. It would be completely different now that we have social media. So it's something that, I've tried to shy away from in stories. I try not to get bogged down with that kind of stuff, but in something like this, I had to address it.
Yeah. How many drinks in were you to come up with Free Bird?
Free Bird. Well, I mean, her name's TJ Bird, the 17-year-old girl who's the leader of the infamous Bird Gang, as she gets called. And I've mentioned the Bird family in other Tibahaw County novels, but I just thought, she needed a hashtag. She needed something that people latched onto to follow her, and you can't go better for a Southerner than Free Bird. So that came out pretty quickly in the writing process.
Yeah, it's great. And for those of you ordering the book and getting this sticker, there's a QR code you can scan for TJ's playlist. And music is always a big thing in your books. And to you, you want to talk a little bit about her music?
Yeah, for TJ in this story, I mean, one of the things I always put in all the books, and there's a Quinn Colson playlist on Spotify you can find and get into it. It's really very classic country, because one of the things I wanted to do with this series is almost have the feel of like some of my favorite movies from the 1970s, period when I was growing up, and really what the South was like at that time. And I really, even though they're very modern stories, I like to kind of have that aesthetic of the 1970s. So I'm always mentioning people of that period, George Jones and Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash, and the people that were popular during that time. But for TJ, really for her, for a 17-year-old girl, her dad would be, my age or younger. And, that was kind of sobering to think about. But I thought about the kind of music that would have influenced her father. And her father, right or wrong or real or imagined, she really looks at as a hero. And she believed that he was somebody who was a hell of a lot better than her mother, who she did not respect and she did not feel was a very capable mother. And her father, who had died in this questionable car accident that she blames, Quinn and his uncle on, is really something I thought about as far as the kind of music he would have been listening to that time. And it's all the music that I listened to in high school. And I can't say it's the greatest soundtrack in the world. It depends on your era. It depends on where you're coming from. But it's, it's Rat, and it's Poison, and it's Bon Jovi, and it's Guns N' Roses, which I like. I like that stuff. But I thought about him kind of being trapped in that period. And music is a way of her kind of communing with her father.
It's a great playlist, actually. It's super fun. So, yeah. So let's see. Next page. All right. So as I already mentioned, Quinn is really not at necessarily the forefront of this novel. Obviously, he and Lily are working this case. For the first time, we find them on opposite ideas here. Lily thinks that TJ's guilty. Quinn, maybe based a little on his background, can relate to her a little bit and give her a little more slack. Why did you decide to make it less Quinn-centric, and why did you decide to put a little conflict between him and Lily this time?
Well, I think Lily was one of those characters, and it sounds crazy when you hear writers talk about this stuff, but she really was one of those characters that initially kind of jumped off the page, that I have so much fun writing her, and I enjoy that character so much. She was really kind of almost too big for the series. She was too big for just, working in this sheriff's office in rural Mississippi. I felt like she was so capable and so good. She had higher aspirations. And throughout the series, a few books ago, she went in and applied and became a U.S. Deputy Marshal. And so she has played a major role in a few books. But for this one, I really thought it would be interesting to see them having a completely, not working together, but almost being at odds between Lily and Quinn, where they have a very different feel and a vision of who TJ Bird is. And for Lily, TJ's mother, Gina, was somebody that she knew back in high school and was actually a friend of hers. And then later, as a deputy, she came out to a lot of domestic disturbance calls that involved the mother and the daughter. And she saw some pretty rough goings on. And her assumption or her idea is that TJ really is a problem kid and has been a problem for the mother her entire life. So she zeroes in pretty quickly that TJ is to blame in this murder. And Quinn is the one back home who's really trying to figure this whole thing out and saying not so fast. And but I like that. I mean, of course, all great stories have to have conflict, and I thought this was a good time for those two to have a different point of view.
Well, and TJ's by no means a perfect child, right? Like, she's clearly done things. So it would make sense for people to assume the worst of her. But yeah.
TJ's like, I mean, I have a great fortune of getting to spend time with folks in law enforcement around here. And I like to do that because I come up with story ideas. I mean, I come up with stuff that I could never do just sitting in my office. You know, I'll come across real life cases. And here where I live in Oxford, Mississippi, I really tried to, before I started writing this book, to hear about some kids who really grew up with really hard Scrabble starts and really rough relationships with their parents. And those were not too hard to find. I mean, those were plentiful here, and I'm sure they're plentiful everywhere. But it was very eye-opening to see so many kids out there that are 14, 15, 16, 13 years old that are fending for themselves. They may have a parent, but the parent is non-functioning. The parent may not be there. The parent may be, have substance abuse issues or be a drunk or whatever, but the kid is having to take the role as a parent, often looking out for other siblings. So TJ was really this kind of composite of many cases that I heard about in North Mississippi. And even though, she doesn't always do the right thing, and she has, occasionally, had a few crimes, she's lifted a few things, but there were always an effort to take care of her family, to look out for her younger brother. So she's somebody I really respected, and I really felt like she was somebody to be admired.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of kind of the multifaceted nature of these characters, I saw somewhere, I don't remember where, but it stood out, I haven't forgotten it, that you said you're not trying to write the woman in the trailer. You need characters. So you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I think for me and the kind of books that I'm drawn to, I like character-driven stories, and it all starts with the character. And I like a good story. I like something that feels authentic. It feels real. It feels like something that I would have covered when I was in the newsroom. I don't like fantastical stories that you're going to call BS on, that there's this Byzantine story that would have never happened in real life, or the way that criminals really, don't act. I really like these. One of the writers I talk about it here is my friend Bill Boyle. Bill writes these wonderful, grounded, true characters. Another friend of ours, but also somebody I'm a fan of, is Megan Abbott. And Megan writes these wonderful, wonderful characters with very believable stories that they're involved in. So, for me, it all started with thinking about Quinn and Lily and TJ and where they are, and this character of Chester Pratt and all. And so once I had those people in mind, then the story kind of came about from that. I'm reading at the moment. I'm reading S.A. Cosby's book, Razor Blade Tears, which everybody's talking about, and they should. It's a dynamite book, and it's all the characters are so rich, and so again, it's not about this reversal, and then you find this, and then it's all this craziness or Byzantine kind of plotting. It's a really heartfelt story with some really detailed characters, and that's what I try to hopefully accomplish in my own work.
Well, and also a focus on like the quality of writing too, obviously, is a major part of your writing and Sean Cosby's writing and Megan's. And for those of you looking for it, he's published under William Boyle. So if you're looking for that, all of you guys, like, the quality of writing and the character development is there. It's not just plot tricks, and nothing against a lovely airplane read full of plot tricks, but it's a different method there.
Different kind of story for sure. And I haven't ruled out the woman in the trailer. If I can pull that off, the
book 12.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
All right. So obviously Quinn Colson, just his personal life has changed. You've already talked about that. He's married. He has 2 kids now. But are there any other ways throughout these 11 books that Quinn Colson has changed that were kind of surprising to you when you look back now?
I don't know if there's anything surprising. I think one of the main things that I've seen change is in the very early books, he was very new to law enforcement. And he was a guy that was he'd been in the Army, came home from Afghanistan. He's not a super soldier or special forces guy or whatever. He came home and did his duty and runs for sheriff, becomes sheriff, and his mentor really is Lily Virgil. And Lily's somebody who had been a cop in Memphis, and she's somebody who knew the ropes. She'd also worked in this county and so that's what's been interesting to see him become a better investigator. I wouldn't say in the early books. I mean, Quinn was, the kind of character, and really the way he was drawn, it was what I wanted to see is he wasn't very good at the investigating. He was very good at kicking in doors and threatening people, but that's not good police work.
Or sustainable.
or sustainable. And I think that through the series, he's become better as an investigator. He's a little slower to react. And I think his humor has come out a little bit more. I think he was a much more of a hard-edged character in the first few books. But I think as the series has gone on, I think he's gained some confidence. So I guess that's been surprising to me, is to see more humor for him. Because in the beginning, he was sort of a very straight arrow character. But I like to see him develop kind of a wry attitude as he gets older.
Johnny Stag is back.
I couldn't keep him down.
Yeah.
I couldn't
keep him down.
Can't keep a bad man down. Johnny was one of those characters. I think that readers that follow the series, he's one of the guys you always hear. That's one of the guys you love to hate, and you love to hate Johnny Stag. And Johnny Stag comes from so many people that I've known as local politicians and corrupt officials and crooks, and that I've known personally, but also a lot of the characters that I would love in great 1970s drive-in movies. I mean, he's really larger than life. And I guess 4 or 5 books ago, it really came to the point where Johnny Stag had to go to he had to go to fictional jail. I mean, there's no way that he could continue doing the things that he was doing without serving some time, and he did. And I wrote him out of the series. And then there is really kind of a second phase of these books that happened. And with that, I don't want to say anything. What happens is, if you haven't read the Revelators, it's kind of a twisting ending. Is from that point, it opened the door for Johnny to come back, and he is so much fun to write about and to write for. And of course, with every Southern bad guy, crook, he's come home from from prison being a redeemed man. And he's walking the straight and narrow path. And, if you believe that for a moment, I was trying to maybe string readers on for a little bit in the Heathens to think that had Johnny really gone straight? Is he really? And I couldn't do it with a straight face. And so I think it's like one paragraph that you think that he possibly had gone straight, and then there's a line where it's the same old Johnny Stag. But he's a lot of fun to write for.
You can tell that you have fun writing him, so that's why I had to mention him. Okay, so you write 2 books a year. Do you ever have writer's block, or did your journalism background just drill that out of you?
I think there's always times that you have really good days and you have bad days. I mean, where I am right now, nice, lovely office here in the square in Oxford, Mississippi, and it's a wonderful place to write. I'm looking at my window, and you can see the courthouse, and you can see Square Books here, and it's just a lovely environment to write. And there's some days I sit here and have my cup of coffee and I'm working, and it just comes out wonderfully. But there are days that are tough, and those are the days that I think you really have to kind of push your way through. I have better days than others. I don't want to say necessarily I have writer's block, but I have days when it's hard to see the path forward. And it's as I tell people who want to get into writing, I say, and this is a little bit over the top, but I say it's 99% inspiration and 1% perspiration. And it's truly that you got to get the inspiration, and you got to find whatever works for you. So at that point, I try to find out whatever inspires me and moves me ahead with the story.
Excellent. Where do you source your character names? It's just people around you?
Where do they come from?
Yeah.
There's certain names that sound right and authentic, and they may be kind of a mashup. Sometimes I'll find names in some obscure county in Alabama, jail log or whatever, and it just rings true. It just seems like that character, and the character name is just damned important to have that person right. And one of the characters in Heathens is a guy who's this wheeler dealer, huckster, owns a liquor store called Chester Pratt. And I just knew a guy named Chester Pratt. You cannot trust a guy named Chester Pratt. I mean, just the sound of it, it's either going to be a huckster or a preacher or something like that. And so, and then, for TJ, I don't know, it just something just sounded right about her name. And once I had the name, she just kind of fell into place. But sometimes I have the name before I have fully developed the character. But yeah, it can come from anywhere. It could be something, honestly, I spot in a newspaper. It could be in a jail log. It could be in a, online telephone book. But I do try to, get something that sounds very Southern. And I have to work at this very differently as opposed to like writing a book in Boston for Spenser. There's very, Boston sounding names that wouldn't sound right in Tippecanoe County. Like a name like came across a name the other day. My wife did. We call someone named Kinsey. Now there'd be nobody who would ever be named Kinsey in Boston. That's just not, that's not an appropriate name. So you got to be very region specific, and it has to sound right.
Well, you did a good job because, I'm from Texas, but I definitely have some rural relatives, and those names are not far off from the authenticity you bring.
There's a very thin line, I think. There is a split, I think, between Southern crime that I write and Texas. But, depending on what part of Texas, I just finished Joe Lansdale's new book, which is terrific, Moon Lake. And that's a very Southern book, but of course he's writing about a very different part of Texas that kind of seems much more Southern. But those people are very familiar to me, sure.
Yeah. Okay, I have a few more questions and then we'll open it up to the audience. If you're watching, I know I see some questions already, but make sure to get those in so I can get to them shortly. So you've written 11 books. I assume one more is in the works about Tippecanoe County and this world of characters. Do you ever dream about them?
I don't think I have. I don't think I've ever dreamed about them. I always wish that I would wake up and have one of those moments where I would have great clarity for that great story. Occasionally I will wake up, not necessarily from a dream, but just wake up early in the morning or the middle of the night, knowing the way things are going to be moving ahead. And that's where that inspiration, that's the most frustrating thing about this work, is I think if you really do it from your heart and you really love it, it has to come from a place of deep inspiration. And that's something you cannot force. You can have a cocktail, you can have a lot of coffee, you can do whatever to push your way through it, and you can. It just has to come to you. So there are days where I'll wake up and I'm very grateful to have that bit of inspiration where I know something is going to happen. Like a character like Chastity, that wasn't really planned in the original idea of the story, but she just appeared, and she just was one day. I woke up with the idea, and I thought she was just right. Somebody would be tagging on to this adventure, which is really it is a procedural in some ways, but I think first and foremost it's really a road novel.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely like Shades of Bonnie and Clyde, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Not as high of a body count, but definitely
kind
of round.
Okay, a couple just fun questions. Which author, dead or alive, would you most like to have dinner with?
Wow. Maybe William Faulkner. I think living here in Oxford, Mississippi, you're just surrounded. I was very good friends and very fond of his niece, the late Dean Faulkner Wells. She was really wonderful to me and to my wife Angela when we first moved here. And she was essentially raised by William Faulkner. Her father had died when she was very young, or actually had not even been born yet. And so William Faulkner raised her. And I always just, of course, you can't live here without greatly admiring him. But and then as far as like somebody meeting, and we talk about this all the time. My go-to living great writer is James Lee Burke. I think he, nobody does it better than him, and he's somebody that I, certainly am inspired by, and someone I look up to a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, same question, but which literary character would you most like to have dinner with?
Who would I like to have dinner with? Probably Spenser, because Spenser really knows how to eat. I was going to say Philip Marlowe, and I love it. Philip Marlowe, I don't think is really, he doesn't eat that well. He's, eats a lot of stale hamburgers and things like that. So yeah, no, Spenser. If you're going to go out to eat, it's got to be Spenser. Nobody eats better than Spenser.
Perfect. Well, that's a great segue to my next question, which is, and we have a couple of people who've already asked it, so I'm just knocking this off the list. Bye Bye Baby, coming in November. You want to tell us about it?
Sure. Bye Bye Baby is it's going to be, I can't believe it. This is going to be, I started writing Quinn. I guess I finished The Ranger right at the time that I was hired by the Parker estate to keep Spenser going. This will be my 10th Spenser novel, and it's going to be the 50th overall Spenser book. So certainly a milestone. It seems like just the other day, I remember being a longtime Robert B. Parker fan when Sudden Mischief came out, and there was a lot of, stuff that was being made of it being the 25th Spenser novel, and now we're looking at number 50, so a real milestone. But in this book, he is, which I'm finishing up right now, Spenser is looking out for a junior congresswoman from Boston, U.S. congresswoman, who's received a great many death threats. And, again, so many of my stories come, from real life and what's happening. And it really came from the idea of, looking at so many, young, strong women that are in Congress right now, and looking at the type of vile hatred that's, even if you don't believe in them politically, what they have to endure every day just as elected officials is mind-boggling. And so it came from that idea. And so he is, Spenser is not only protecting her, but trying to find out who's issuing a viable death threat among thousands of death threats. And so that was the catalyst for this book.
Excellent. So again, fingers crossed we'll get to see you in person.
Yeah.
For that, you've already given a shout out to Joe Lansdale and S.A. Cosby. Any other books you've read recently that you like and want to mention? And again, these people, I know these people, and I'm not saying this because they're my friends. Sometimes you get to be friends with writers because you respect them and you really dig what they do. But Melissa Ginsburg, who's actually from Houston, had a tremendous book that came out earlier this year called The House Uptown. And I think it's as good of a New Orleans novel, truly, as I've ever read. It's just this very smart, engaging book. And again, it hits those things which I feel very strongly about as a writer, which it has very rich, wonderful, detailed characters. And there is a crime in it, but, it's not a game of Clue. And again, not disparaging anyone who does that. I felt deeply immersed in this book, and I thought it was one of the best books I've read all year. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to open it to audience questions now. Let's see here. Oh, lots of regulars watching. Hi, all my favorite people who are regulars watching. You know who you are. All right. There's a long comment here. I'm going to try to dig out the question out of it. So essentially, can you discuss, Vicki would like you to discuss how you're handling Spenser's aging, and where do you see him going? Like retiring with Susan or a fatal showdown? What's going to happen to Spenser?
Yeah, it's a question I get, I think, every time I do a talk, is people ask about his aging. Spenser that world is totally different from Quinn Colson. And when I started writing Quinn Colson, he was 29 years old, and now he's 40. And so he's growing older, and his life changes, and things are not static. But it was something that I inherited to continue this after being hired by Robert Parker's wife, Joan, is Spenser's essentially kind of stuck in time. If we were really, and people come to me with these stories about Spenser as if I don't know him, I'm very well aware that he was a Korean War vet. I'm very well aware that the Godwolf manuscript took place in 1973, and I'm very well aware of the time that Bob mentioned dates and times and ages, until at some point he didn't, and he stopped that. And that was Parker's own decision. Parker, around the late 90s, early 2000s, decided to keep Spenser completely fully formed at a certain time, and he never got any older, and things didn't change. But however, the world did continue to change. And so even though Spenser didn't get older, Boston changed, and things were contemporary. And that was the only thing that they asked me to do as far as the estate, being Joan Parker and his longtime literary agent, is they wanted me to keep things contemporary. And it would have been my idea, you can imagine, to do something as a time period, which I feel very adept at doing. I've written books about the 50s and the 20s and the 30s, and I would have loved to have written about 1960s 1870s Boston. But I think they were right about it, is they felt like part of the long-running success was to keep things contemporary. So this is how I keep things straight. This is the rule. I'm 51, and so Quinn is 10 years younger than I am, and Spenser is 10 or so years older than I am. And that's the way that I write Spenser. And when I first started writing Spenser, there were a lot of jokes about kind of getting older, and he would have knee problems, or he would have a dislocated shoulder, that kind of thing. And it was kind of something that I was having to kind of lean on my imagination to come up with, like this aging details. But now it's not really funny anymore, because now I'm actually experiencing these things. I'm aging into Spenser. I'm getting older. I'm becoming Spenser. And so I don't have to imagine those things as much. But that's how I keep track of it. The Spenser that I write about, much in the same way that the TV series was a little bit different. Robert Urich was not that character that he's playing was not a Korean War vet. He was a Vietnam War vet. So Spenser is tailor-made to the time period.
Awesome. So you're catching up to Spenser.
I'm catching up.
Quinn is aging with you.
He's
10 years behind.
Quinn's still a relatively young man, so he's got a lot of adventures ahead of him. But for me, I don't know. Someday, when the books continue, which they surely will, somebody might have a completely different take on things. But for me, Spenser is somewhere in his 60s, and that's the way that I always see him.
Excellent. Do you have plans to start a Lily Virgil series in the future?
There's always plans for a Lily Virgil series, and I've got kind of almost like a Netflix queue of projects that I want to take on. And one of the ones that I really have been wanting to do for some time is to do a book about Lily. And in some ways, the Heathens almost feels kind of like a tryout for that. It almost feels like anyone who wants to feel what a Lily Virgil book would be like, they could check out the Heathens, because she really is a dual protagonist in this particular novel. We'll see. Some of those decisions, let's say, are all my own, but they're not. Some of those are, decided by editors and publishers and that kind of thing. But I'd love to write I'd write a Lily Virgil book. I'd start it tonight. And again, it's something for me. And McKenna, you and I talked about this. It's not. I always kind of cringe when I see male writers writing with a female protagonist, and it's always like, I don't know. It just sometimes just doesn't work. But I wouldn't be going into that with Lily, because she's been such a long-running character, and I think she's somebody who's just carved out a niche of her own. She's somebody I think she could stand on her own.
Absolutely. And people like her, and you've written her so well, and like it's not like she's in Oxford or Tibahaw County having cosmopolitans. Like, you write her to be the character that she is. So
she's very real to me, and I think the reason why is, when I used to cover law enforcement, is I know so many women like Lily. I mean, there's so many just tough women that were cops or sheriffs, deputies, and a good friend of mine here in town in Oxford right now. She's currently a U.S. Marshal, and she's probably 10 times saltier than Lily. But she's done many of the same things, and somebody I like a great deal. So I enjoy spending time with Lily.
Well, so do we. So I'll read that book in a heartbeat if and when it is written. Lou was wondering, are there story ideas you've had over the last 10 years that don't fit in Quinn or Spenser? And do you have plans for those down the line?
That's a very good question, Blue. I appreciate that very much. Yes. It kind of goes back to what I talk about, my queue of projects. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to keep these series going for 10 years, writing 2 books a year. But the only downside to that is I've got so many books that I want to write that don't involve Quinn or Lily or Spenser. And when do I get time to write that? And that's getting a little bit more challenging as things go on and as time marches on, unlike in Spenser world. And yes, I've got several books that I hope I'm going to get a chance to write very soon, because they're books that I'm very passionate about. I really want to get into, and so hopefully that'll happen soon.
Are any of them historicals?
Near historicals, and then it's funny it depends on who I'm talking to, the definition of a historical, because I don't think about the 1970s being historical, but I guess it is now. I guess even the 90s are historical.
We define, I think technically it's supposed to be 50 years. So the staff members who kind of predate me at the bookstore refused to put the 1960s in historical. So like we have this line.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement right there. There's a book from, not only do I want to write a book about Lily, but I really have this idea that I've been wanting to write about, and it's been mentioned in the Quinn books. It's a story that is kind of referenced, but it's a story about Quinn's father and his work as a stuntman in the 1970s in Hollywood. And I've been wanting to write this book for a long time, and hopefully I will. But so yeah, a standalone with Lily. I want to write a book about Quinn's dad, and there's a lot of kind of offshoots of Tippecanoe County that I want to explore.
All right, well, that feeds into this question. Will you ever write centered on Caddy Colson?
I love Caddy. I think Caddy's like for me is like the antithesis. I never, these books have this kind of like spiritual element to them that is not something that I was seeking out in any kind of way, but you really can't write about Mississippi, the Deep South, or Texas without addressing, the power of the church and people's draw to Christianity and how that affects your community. But I think for people who've read the series, Caddy's somebody I admire a great deal. When we first meet her, in The Ranger, her life is a mess, and she really throughout the series becomes, I think, one of the strongest characters in the whole thing, and somebody who really does talk the talk and walk the walk, and really does a lot to help a lot of other people. I mean, I wish there were a ton of people like Caddy Colson. I'd love to write about. Caddy's kind of out of this series right now. She's kind of progressed to the point where she and a character named Donnie Varner have left town to kind of start their new life in Texas. But I think she'll be coming back. I don't know about a standalone with Caddy, but I would love to write about her someday. And I like to check in. And as crazy as that sound is, she's so real to me, and see how she's doing.
Excellent. We don't have any more questions, and you and I have talked about all the things. So anything else you want to add about this book? I will again say that we have signed book plates. We have Quinn Colson For Sheriff bumper stickers, as well as these super cool Freebird stickers that have the QR code. And we'll be putting those in the package for anyone who wants to order books. There's a link in the comments on Facebook and YouTube with more information about Ace, about his books, and to order copies. So I guess that's all we're going to talk about tonight. Ace, as always, it's been wonderful to see you, and in person in November.
Oh, absolutely. Margaritas, we're on for sure. So hopefully see you then. And thanks for the 10 years of support for the series. And thanks for the readers out there that if they didn't enjoy these books and they didn't like Quinn Colson, there wouldn't be 11 of them. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, well, I'm sure everyone's glad that the books keep coming. I know I am. So to those of you watching, everyone have a wonderful evening. Thanks for tuning in. And maybe I'll see you back on here tomorrow. Bye.